There is a 6-minute stretch in the 4th episode of True Detective where the camera never once cuts away. It follows a man through a robbery falling apart around him, through gunfire and panic and a desperate climb over a fence, all in a single unbroken shot that the crew filmed 7 times and nearly could not pull off at all. Around that same time, a different show was ending, with a man sitting in a desert, finally admitting the truth about who he really was. 2 shows, 2 broken men, both called some of the greatest television ever made. People treat them like twins. They are opposites in almost every way that matters, and that difference goes all the way down to how they were born. One was built slowly by a whole team across 6 years. The other was carved by 2 minds in a single sharp burst. Welcome to Between the Episodes. Let's begin. Section 1. 2 very different beginnings. Breaking Bad and True Detective often land in the same conversation. Both are dark. Both follow troubled men doing ugly things in lonely places. Both arrived in the same handful of years. Both were praised as some of the finest television ever made. And both still get played late at night by people who already know how they end. Set side by side, they can feel like brothers cut from the same cloth. They were built by very different kinds of people, chasing very different goals, and that gap is where this whole comparison truly begins. Vince Gilligan made Breaking Bad. For years before that, he wrote for a science fiction series called The X-Files, a long job that taught him exactly how a television writing team works, week after week, season after season. He learned the craft of building a story with a room full of other writers and a steady stream of directors rotating in and out. That world shaped how he thought about everything that came next. Gilligan carried around one strange idea he could not let go of. Most shows, he had noticed, keep their main characters frozen in place on purpose. The funny dad stays the funny dad. The tough cop stays the tough cop. A series can run for 10 years, and the people in it barely move an inch, because that sameness is what keeps fans comfortable. Gilligan wanted to flip that rule upside down. He wanted a main character who would change completely from the first scene to the last. He once described his plan in a way that became famous among fans of the show. He wanted to take a gentle, harmless schoolteacher, the kind of soft and kindly man you might call a Mr. Chips, and slowly turn him into a cold and dangerous criminal, the kind of man you might call Scarface. The change itself was the whole point of the series. The man he built to carry that idea is Walter White, played by Bryan Cranston. Walt is a high school chemistry teacher in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He is very smart, badly underpaid, and quietly let down by where his life has ended up. Early in the story, he learns he has lung cancer that has already spread through his body, and the doctors tell him there is no cure. Frightened about leaving his pregnant wife and his teenage son with nothing after he dies, Walt makes a choice that breaks his whole life open. He uses his deep knowledge of chemistry to start cooking a street drug called crystal meth, and he partners up with a former student of his, a young man named Jesse Pinkman, played by Aaron Paul. Their very first lab is a beat-up camper van they park out in the empty desert. Even the title points at this plan. Breaking Bad is an old Southern saying. It means to turn wild, to go bad, to start raising hell after a lifetime of playing it safe. The name is a promise about who Walt is going to become. A big part of why the idea worked came down to who was cast. Before this series, most people knew Bryan Cranston only as a silly, lovable father from a comedy show. Watching that same warm, familiar face slowly harden into something frightening gave the whole thing an extra punch. Season by season, Walt drifts further from the timid man he used to be, until the gentle teacher has nearly disappeared and someone much darker is wearing his clothes. The show also got lucky in a way that looked, at first, like terrible luck. Breaking Bad began airing in early 2008, but a writer's strike had chopped its first season down to just 7 episodes. That forced break ended up helping the series. It handed Gilligan and his team extra time to think, and they used it to slow everything down. They had started to feel Walt was turning bad too quickly, so they pulled the reins back and let his slide into crime happen one careful step at a time. That patient, slow-burning pace became one of the most loved things about the entire run, which stretched across 5 seasons and 62 episodes before it ended in 2013. True Detective grew out of a different world, inside a very different kind of mind. Nick Pizzolatto created it, and he wrote every single episode of its first season by himself. Before he came to television, Pizzolatto was not a TV man at all. He taught reading and writing at a university, and he wrote books for a living. He was a novelist, with a published novel called Galveston already behind him. When he sat down to write True Detective, he said he handled it the same way he handled his novels, as one long and careful story flowing out of one mind. Writing for the screen was brand new to him. This was his first time doing it. That single-voice feeling ran straight through the making of the show. Pizzolatto wrote all 8 episodes, and a single director, Cary Joji Fukunaga, directed all 8 of them too. So the entire first season poured out of basically 2 people leaning hard in the same direction. The end result feels less like a normal weekly TV series, and more like one very long film, or a thick book read straight through in a single quiet sitting. The story follows 2 police detectives in Louisiana, Rust Cohle, played by Matthew McConaughey, and Marty Hart, played by Woody Harrelson. In the year 1995, the 2 men are sent to look into a horrible crime. A young woman named Dora Lang is found dead in a field, tied to a tree, posed like part of some dark and secret ritual, with a crown of deer antlers placed on her head. The picture is eerie and unforgettable, and it sets the heavy mood for everything that follows. From there, the season slips back and forth between 2 stretches of time. There is the original case in 1995, and there is the year 2012, 17 years later, when the 2 men, now older and worn thin by life, are pulled back in and asked to talk through that old murder all over again. The timing of True Detective mattered as much as its story. For most of his career, Matthew McConaughey had been known for light, charming romantic comedies. Right before this show, though, he had begun taking on darker, heavier, sadder roles, and people had started praising him as a serious actor in a way they never quite had before. Stepping into Rust Cohle, a gloomy and haunted man who speaks in long, slow speeches about death and meaning, fit perfectly into that new chapter he was writing for himself. So both shows hand us a dark crime story about a damaged man. The hearts beating inside them are nothing alike. Gilligan built a machine made for change. He wanted people watching to see a good man become a bad one so gradually that nobody can quite point to the moment it happened. The whole pleasure of Breaking Bad lives in movement. Its main character is never standing still for long. He is always one bad decision deeper into the dark than he was the week before, and the thrill comes from watching him sink. Pizzolatto built something closer to a long, mournful poem about ideas. Rust Cohle does not really change the way Walt does. He shows up already broken, already certain that the world is empty and cruel and pointless. And the show is less about watching him become someone new and more about sitting quietly inside his grim view of life. Where Breaking Bad keeps asking how far a single person can fall, True Detective keeps asking whether any of it means anything at all, and it lets its main character spend hours arguing that maybe none of it does. The roots of each creator show plainly in the feel of each show. Gilligan came up through years of television, where stories get hammered out by a room full of writers and a parade of different directors take turns steering each hour. Breaking Bad hums with that team energy, full of many hands and moving parts, working together across a long, winding road. Pizzolatto came up through books, where one writer alone controls every comma. True Detective carries that lonely single-author mood, tight and locked down, and just a little obsessed, the way a novel written by one stubborn person can be. Here is where the comparison really opens up. These two shows stand as two opposite answers to the very same question. How do you make a great and serious story about a broken man? Gilligan answered with change, patience, and a big crew laying down a long road, one stone at a time, across many years. Pizzolatto answered with a fixed, gloomy vision, a single writing voice, a single director, and a short, dense story crammed into only 8 hours of screen time. Almost everything else worth comparing about these two series, from the way they look to the way they leave us feeling at the end, grows straight out of this first split in how they were born. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That split does not stay tucked away in the background. It turns into something a person can actually measure, counting up the number of hands that touched each show and the number of hours each one runs. The next part steps back to study the plain shape of the two series, and the distance between them turns out to be far wider than it first looks. Section 2. One long road and one short story. The simplest way to feel the gap between these two shows is to count. Count the hours, count the seasons, count the people who held the steering wheel. The numbers tell a story all by themselves, and that story explains a great deal about why the two series feel so different, even when they are sitting in the same dark corner of television. Breaking Bad is enormous. It ran for 5 seasons. It holds 62 episodes. It started airing in early 2008 and did not finish until late 2013, which means it lived in the world for almost 6 years. People grew up a little while it was on. They moved houses, changed jobs, fell in and out of love, all while Walter White kept slowly sinking deeper into his dark new life, week after week, year after year. The show became a kind of long companion, the way a series can when it sticks around long enough to feel like part of your actual life. True Detective is tiny next to it. Its first season is only 8 episodes. The whole thing aired across a couple of months in early 2014, and then it was simply over. You can watch every minute of it in a single long weekend if you want to, the way you might read a thick novel from cover to cover. There is no growing up alongside it. There is just a short, intense plunge into one story, and then you surface again and it is done. This difference in size is not a small thing. It changes what each show is even able to do. A long road like Breaking Bad has the luxury of time. 62 hours is a huge amount of room. It lets the writers take a tiny detail from the very first season and quietly pay it off 4 years later. It lets a side character wander in, disappear for a stretch, and come roaring back with new weight. Most of all, it gives Walt the space to change at the slow, believable pace Gilligan wanted so badly. A man cannot turn from a gentle teacher into a hardened criminal in 8 hours without the change feeling rushed and fake. Stretch that same journey across 6 years, though, and it starts to feel almost natural, like watching a person you actually know slowly become someone you no longer recognize. A short story like True Detective has the opposite gift. It cannot wander. It has no time to waste, so it wastes none. Every scene is pulling in the same direction, tightening the same knot, building the same heavy mood. Nothing is allowed to sag or drift. That tightness is exactly why the season hits so hard and so fast. It is the difference between a slow, patient river and a single sharp blade. One wears you down over a long stretch of time. The other cuts in one clean stroke. The way each show is built explains why one could go long and the other had to stay short. Breaking Bad was made the way most television gets made, by a team. There was a room full of writers who sat together and argued and planned and shaped the story across all those years. And there was a steady rotation of different directors, each one stepping in to handle a few episodes here and there before handing off to the next. Plenty of people took turns steering across the run. Names like Adam Bernstein, Michelle MacLaren, Michael Slovis, Thomas Schnauz, and others all directed pieces of it, with Gilligan himself directing some too. Even the most loved hours of the show were shaped by this group effort, with one person writing while another person directed, and a room full of others helping plan the whole path. This team setup is what lets a show run long. No single person has to carry 62 episodes alone, because the work is shared out across many hands. One writer can be tired while another is fresh. One director can be filming this week while another is already planning next week. The load gets spread around, and that sharing of weight is part of how a series survives for 6 years without falling apart. True Detective was made in nearly the opposite way. As covered earlier, Nick Pizzolatto wrote all 8 episodes of the first season by himself, and Cary Joji Fukunaga directed every single one of them. So the whole season ran on basically 2 people, both leaning hard in the same direction the entire time. There was no rotating crew of directors trading off. There was no big room of writers passing the story back and forth. There was one writing voice and one directing eye, locked together for all 8 hours. That kind of tight, 2-person grip is wonderful for making something feel unified and personal and intense. It is also nearly impossible to keep up for very long. One writer cannot pour out 62 episodes alone without burning to ash. One director cannot film 6 straight years of television by himself. The very thing that makes True Detective feel so single-minded and controlled is the same thing that makes a short run the only sensible choice. You can sprint that hard for 8 episodes. You cannot sprint that hard for 62. There is a useful way to picture the whole difference. Breaking Bad is like a long highway built by a large crew. Many workers laid it down, mile after mile, over a long stretch of time, each handling their own section before passing the work along. The road goes on, and it can keep going, precisely because so many hands are building it. True Detective is more like a single tunnel, carved by 2 people, working side by side with total focus. It is narrow. It is short. It goes in one direction with no detours, and it feels exactly as personal and exactly as locked down as something dug by just 2 pairs of hands. The format of each show makes this even clearer. Breaking Bad is one continuous story. Each season picks up close to where the last one left off, following the same people in the same city, carrying their choices forward the whole way through. When you finish episode 1, episode 2 is the next chapter of the same book, and so on for all 62 of them. The story never resets. It only deepens. This is why the show could keep running for years. There was always a next chapter to tell, always another step for Walt to take deeper into the dark. True Detective works in a totally different way, called an anthology. In an anthology, each season tells its own complete story, with its own people and its own setting. And then it lets all of that go. When a new season begins, the cast changes, the place changes, the mystery changes, and the story before it simply ends and stays ended. So the first season of True Detective, the one with Rust and Marty down in Louisiana, is a closed and finished thing. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, all sealed inside those 8 episodes, with nothing meant to continue past them. This is a giant difference in how the 2 shows ask to be watched. Breaking Bad wants your loyalty over a long haul. It wants you to come back week after week, season after season, growing more and more attached to people you have followed for years. The reward is depth, the rich feeling of knowing a character so well that their smallest choice lands like a punch. True Detective wants your full attention for one short, sharp burst, and then it sets you free. The reward is intensity, the feeling of one perfect, complete story that never overstays its welcome or wears out its idea. Neither way is better than the other. They are simply built for different things, and they ask for different things from the person watching. A long, continuous show like Breaking Bad carries one real risk. Stretched across so many hours, it could lose its way. It could wander, repeat itself, or run out of road and limp to a weak finish, the way many long series sadly do. The fact that Breaking Bad managed to stay sharp across all 62 episodes and stick its landing is a large part of why people praise it so highly. Going long is dangerous. Going long and staying great is rare. A short, closed show like True Detective carries the opposite risk. With only 8 hours and no chance to fix things later, every single episode has to count. There is no room for a weak stretch, because a weak stretch in a series this short would sink a big chunk of the whole thing. The pressure on each hour is enormous. One bad episode out of 62 is barely a scratch. One bad episode out of 8 is a real wound. You can also feel the difference in how time moves inside each story. Breaking Bad mostly moves straight ahead, with a few clever exceptions where it jumps forward to tease something coming later. The show generally walks forward in order, one day leading into the next, one choice setting up the choice after it. That steady forward march fits a long story being told, one careful step at a time. It feels like a life being lived in real time, which is part of why following Walt for years feels so much like knowing an actual person. True Detective deliberately scrambles its time. The season keeps cutting between 1995, when the two detectives first work the case, and 2012, 17 years later, when older versions of the same men sit and retell that old story. The viewer is constantly holding two time periods in their head at once, comparing the younger men to the older ones, hunting for the gaps between what they say happened and what really did. This braided, back-and-forth shape would be exhausting and confusing if it had to last 62 hours. Packed into 8, it becomes a tight little puzzle, a mystery you can hold in your hands and turn over and study from every side. So the plain shape of these two shows points straight back to the difference in how they were born. Breaking Bad came from a man who spent years inside the world of television, where stories are built by teams across long stretches of time. It became a long, continuous highway, made by many hands, telling one ever-deepening story for almost 6 years. True Detective came from a novelist making his first trip into television, who wrote alone and worked with a single director. It became a short, sealed tunnel, made by two focused minds, telling one complete and finished story in only 8 hours. Counting the hours and counting the hands turns out to explain a surprising amount. The size of a show shapes the kind of story it can carry. The number of people building it shapes how long it can run. And the choice between one long road and one short, closed story shapes the entire feeling of the thing, right down to how it asks you to spend your time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one place where this whole difference comes into the sharpest possible focus, and oddly enough, it is the same place both shows reached for their finest hour. Each series produced a single piece of work, so striking that people still point to it years later. The way those two standout moments were made, one by a team and one by a lone director swinging for the fences, says everything about how these shows really differ behind the scenes. Section 3. Two greatest hours, built two different ways. Every great show has a peak. Somewhere in the run, there is 1 hour that rises above the rest. The one people talk about for years. The one they point to when they want to prove how good the whole thing really was. Breaking Bad has its peak. True Detective has its peak. And the strange, perfect thing is that these two peaks were built in almost opposite ways, which makes them the clearest window yet into how differently these two shows worked behind the scenes. Start with Breaking Bad. Its finest hour is an episode called Ozymandias. It is the 14th episode of the 5th season, and the 60th episode of the series overall. So it arrives near the very end of the long road, when years of bad choices finally come crashing down all at once. The praise for this single hour is hard to overstate. Many people who write about television call it one of the greatest episodes ever made, full stop. On one of the biggest movie and TV rating websites, where regular viewers grade what they watch, Ozymandias holds a perfect top score, a rare thing almost no episode of anything ever reaches. In 2024, a major magazine that ranks these things named it the single best TV episode of all time. Even Vince Gilligan, the man who created the whole show, has called it the finest hour the series ever produced. The title itself is a clue to what the episode is doing. Ozymandias is the name of an old poem about a once mighty ruler whose giant statue has crumbled to broken rubble in the desert, with nothing left of his power but ruined stone, half buried in the sand. By the time this episode airs, that is exactly what is happening to Walt. Everything he built, every lie he told, every empire he dreamed of, all of it falls to pieces around him in a single devastating hour. The whole point of naming the episode after that poem is to tell you that the king is about to watch his kingdom turn to dust. Now here is the part that matters for this comparison. Ozymandias was built by a team, exactly the way the whole show was built. One person wrote it, a different person directed it. The writer was Moira Walley-Beckett, who had worked on the series for years. The director was Rian Johnson, who had directed a couple of earlier Breaking Bad episodes, and would later go on to make several big, well-known films of his own. So this peak hour, the greatest the show ever reached, came from two different talented people, pointing their separate skills at the same target. The writer shaped the words and the story beats. The director shaped how it all looked and moved and felt on screen. Two minds, two jobs, one extraordinary result. The episode also carries a small, sad piece of history. When Moira Walley-Beckett later won television's biggest writing award for her work on Ozymandias, she became the first woman in 20 years to win that particular drama writing prize on her own. That detail tells you how much the work stood out. It was not just good for the show. It was rare and special in the wider world of television writing. Everything about how Ozymandias was made fits the larger truth about Breaking Bad. It was a team effort. The greatness came out of many hands working together, each person handling their own piece. The writer wrote, the director directed, the actors acted, editors stitched it together, and the magic happened in the spaces where all those separate skills overlapped and lifted one another up. This is how the whole series worked, all 62 episodes of it, and its single greatest hour was no exception. It was the team method, reaching its highest possible point. True Detective found its peak in a completely different way. Its most famous moment is not really a whole episode. It is one single scene near the end of the 4th episode of the 1st season, an episode called Who Goes There? And what makes this scene legendary is not what happens in it, but how it was filmed. The entire thing, which runs about 6 minutes long, was shot in one continuous, unbroken take. No cuts, no stopping, no stitching together. The camera simply follows the action, moving and weaving through it all, for 6 straight minutes, without ever once breaking away. To understand why that is so impressive, think about how almost everything on screen is normally made. A normal scene is filmed in dozens of little pieces. The camera films one angle, then they stop, move the camera, film another angle, stop again, and so on. Later, an editor takes all those little pieces and glues them together into something that looks smooth. That cutting and gluing is how nearly all film and television gets made, because it is far easier and far more forgiving. If one little piece goes wrong, you just refilm that one piece. A long, unbroken take throws all of that safety away. For 6 full minutes, everything has to go right at the exact same time. The actors have to hit every mark perfectly. The camera operator has to move flawlessly. Every other person involved has to do their job without a single slip. Because the moment anything goes wrong, the whole 6 minutes is ruined, and they have to start over from the very beginning. It is a little like trying to walk a tightrope across a long gap. You cannot do half of it and rest. You either make it all the way across in one go, or you fall. The scene itself is built for maximum tension. Rust Kohel, the gloomy detective, has gone undercover with a dangerous gang to pull off a robbery, and the whole plan goes horribly wrong. For 6 unbroken minutes, the camera stays with him as everything falls apart around him, through gunfire and chaos and a desperate scramble to escape. Because there are no cuts, you never get a moment to breathe. You are trapped right there, in the middle of it with him, second by second, with no escape and no relief, exactly the way Rust himself is trapped. The unbroken filming is not just a show-off trick. It puts you inside the panic, in a way that normal chopped-up filming never could. The man behind it was the director, Cary Joji Fukunaga, the same single director who handled all 8 episodes of the season. Long, unbroken takes were already something he loved and had used in films he made before this show. He came onto True Detective knowing he wanted to pull off one of these long takes somewhere in the season, and when he read the script for this particular episode, he knew the robbery scene was the one. Filming it was every bit as hard as it sounds. The crew shot the whole 6-minute sequence 7 separate times, throwing away the first few attempts because they did not come together well enough. The location made it even tougher. They filmed in a real housing project, a place with real buildings and a real fence, and they were not allowed to take any of it apart to make filming easier. At one point, the path of the scene needed the camera to get over a tall fence, which became one of the trickiest pieces of the whole thing. The crew figured out a clever fix, lifting the camera operator up on a special raised arm so he could float up and over the fence while keeping the shot going. A backup plan was quietly prepared in case the unbroken take proved impossible, but in the end, they got it. There is one more detail about that shot that makes the daring of it even clearer. The crew did not nail it on the first try, or the second, or the third. They ran the whole 6-minute sequence, over and over, 7 separate times in all, and the first 3 attempts were thrown away because they simply did not come together the way they needed to. Picture that for a moment. Every single time they reset, the actors had to walk back to their starting spots. The camera had to return to its opening position. The gunfire and the chaos and the timing all had to be lined up fresh, and then the entire risky run had to begin again, from the very top. One small slip anywhere in those 6 minutes meant starting the whole thing over from scratch. The director also did something quietly smart to protect against total disaster. While they were filming, he secretly planned out a few hidden spots where 2 separate takes could be stitched together later, just in case the full unbroken version proved impossible to capture. It was a safety net, a backup plan tucked away out of sight. If the perfect single run never came, he could still quietly join 2 good runs at one of those hidden seams and get something close. In the end, the safety net was not needed, and the shot stands as a true unbroken take. But the fact that he built the net at all shows how aware everyone was of the risk. They were attempting something that could fall apart at any second, and they knew it, and they tried it anyway. Notice the difference from Ozymandias. The Breaking Bad peak came from a team, with a writer and a director, and a crowd of others, each handling their own piece. The True Detective peak is far more the vision of one person, the single director who controlled the whole season, swinging for something enormous and risky, and pulling it off through sheer focus and nerve. One peak is the triumph of many hands working together. The other is the triumph of one set of hands refusing to blink. And the world noticed that single set of hands. For his work directing this episode, Cary Joji Fukunaga won television's biggest directing award. That win is its own little story, because it happened at the same big award ceremony where Breaking Bad was sweeping nearly everything else. Out of all the major drama categories that night, the directing prize was the one place True Detective broke through and beat Breaking Bad. The lone director, with his lone unbroken take, claimed the one trophy the team behind Breaking Bad did not. These two peaks, side by side, tell you almost everything about how the two shows really differ deep down. Ozymandias is great because of teamwork and patience. It works because of years of build-up, 60 episodes of story, all paying off at once, written by one skilled person and directed by another, each trusting the other to handle their part. Its power comes from accumulation, from the slow piling up of everything that came before, finally collapsing in one crushing hour. You cannot make an Ozymandias in a hurry. It needs the long road behind it, and it needs many hands to build that road. The 6-minute take in Who Goes There is great because of focus and daring. It works because one director decided to attempt something most people would call too risky, and then made everyone around him rise to meet it. Its power comes from intensity, from the white-knuckle feeling of watching something that could fall apart at any second, somehow hold together all the way to the end. You cannot make that shot with a relaxed, spread-out team taking turns. It needs one obsessed mind, gripping the wheel and refusing to let go. Both methods produced something unforgettable. That is the quiet lesson hiding inside this comparison. There is no single correct way to make great television. Breaking Bad reached the mountaintop through years of careful teamwork, with its writer and its director and its whole crew, each contributing a piece of the puzzle. True Detective reached its own mountaintop through one director betting everything on a single impossible-looking shot. Different roads, same destination. It even circles back to the very beginning of all this. Breaking Bad was born from a man who came up through the team world of television, and its greatest hour was a team triumph. True Detective was born from a novelist and a single director working in tight lockstep, and its greatest moment was a single director's triumph. The way each show was born is the same way each show peaked. The beginning predicted the high point. There is one more thing worth sitting with. Both of these peaks are about a man at his absolute limit. Walt, in Ozymandias, is at the limit of his lies, watching his whole world crumble. Rust, in that 6-minute take, is at the limit of his nerve, fighting to survive a plan gone wrong. Both shows saved their finest craft for the moment their main character was pushed as far as a person can go. That is no accident. These are both, underneath everything, deep studies of damaged men, and the craft was always in service of digging into those men. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which raises the real question lurking under both shows. Walt and Rust are very different creatures, and the kind of broken each one is, turns out to be the deepest difference of all. One of these men spends his whole story changing into someone new. The other shows up already finished, already certain the world is empty, and barely moves at all. The next part looks closely at these two damaged men, and at why one of them is built to transform while the other is built to stand perfectly still. Section 4. The man who changes and the man who stands still. Strip away the desert and the bayou, the gunfights and the long speeches, and both shows come down to the same thing: a close, careful study of one broken man. Walter White carries Breaking Bad. Rust Cohle carries True Detective. They are the beating hearts of their stories, the reason people keep coming back. Set them next to each other, though, and they turn out to be almost perfect opposites in the one way that matters most. One man is built to change. The other is built to stand still. Walt is a story about motion. When the show begins, Walter White is about as harmless as a person can be. He is a high school chemistry teacher in Albuquerque, soft-spoken and timid, the kind of man who gets pushed around and quietly takes it. He is brilliant, far smarter than the life he is stuck in, but he has learned to swallow that brilliance and shrink himself down. He wears dull clothes. He speaks in a small voice. He apologizes a lot. Early on, he is almost painfully gentle, a man who seems incapable of hurting anyone. By the end of the show, that man is gone. In his place stands someone cold, ruthless, and frightening. A person who lies without blinking, who hurts people on purpose, who has built an empire of crime and stacked up a long trail of bodies behind him. The gentle teacher has been buried so deep, he barely flickers anymore. And the whole power of the series lives in watching that change happen, one slow step at a time, so gradually that you can never quite point to the single moment the good man became the bad one. This was the plan from the very start. Vince Gilligan built the entire show around this transformation. His famous goal was to take a gentle, harmless schoolteacher and slowly turn him into a cold and dangerous criminal. The change is not a side effect of the story. The change is the story. Everything else is just the road that carries Walt from the man he was to the man he becomes. You can even hear the change in the way Walt talks about himself across the years. There is a famous moment, fairly deep into the run, where Walt's wife frets that someone dangerous might come to their door to hurt him. Walt's reply flips the whole picture. He tells her she has it backwards, that he is not the one in danger. He says he is the danger. He says he is the one who knocks. In that moment, the timid teacher is fully gone, and something proud and terrifying has taken his place. He is no longer afraid of the monster at the door. He has become the monster. Later still, there is another famous scene where Walt forces a rival to admit out loud who he really is, demanding that the man say his name. It is a moment of pure, swollen ego, a man drunk on his own power, miles away from the meek figure who started the series apologizing for taking up space. These two moments work like markers on the long road of his change. The first shows him claiming his power. The second shows him soaking in it. Between them, you can measure exactly how far the gentle teacher has fallen. The reason this transformation lands so hard ties back to who plays him. Before Breaking Bad, most people knew Bryan Cranston as a silly, lovable father from a comedy. That familiar warmth was a secret weapon. Watching that same soft, friendly face slowly harden into something cruel gave the change an extra jolt. It felt like watching someone you trusted curdle in front of you. The casting made the journey from kind to cruel feel personal and real. Rust Cohle is the opposite kind of character. Rust is a story about stillness. When True Detective begins, Rust is already broken. He does not start out gentle and slowly turn dark the way Walt does. He arrives dark. He shows up on the very first day already certain that the world is empty, cruel, and pointless, already carrying a deep, settled gloom that he wears like a heavy coat. He has been through terrible loss in his past, and that pain has hardened into a fixed view of life. He does not believe things will get better. He does not really believe things mean anything at all. Across the season, Rust does not transform the way Walt transforms. He mostly stays exactly who he is. He spends the whole story being the same, grim, watchful, sad man, delivering long, slow speeches about death and meaning, and the emptiness he sees everywhere he looks. Where Walt is a moving target, always one step further into the dark than he was last week, Rust is a fixed point. He is the still center, and the other characters and the case itself swirl around him while he barely budges. This is a completely different way to build a main character, and it serves a completely different purpose. Walt's stillness would ruin Breaking Bad, because that show needs movement to work. Rust's transformation would ruin True Detective, because that show needs a fixed, certain voice to anchor its heavy mood. Each man is built to do exactly what his show requires. One must change for his story to mean anything. The other must hold steady for his story to mean anything. Rust's most famous words show how locked in his view is. At one point, he says that time is a flat circle. The idea behind the phrase is that everything that has ever happened will happen again and again, forever, with nothing ever truly changing. It is a bleak, hopeless thought, and it fits Rust perfectly, because it is a thought about a world that cannot change. That is the deepest difference of all, sitting right there in his most quoted line. Walt's whole story is about a man who changes completely. Rust's whole philosophy is that change is an illusion, and nothing ever really moves at all. There is a small, telling detail buried in that famous line, and it shows how carefully True Detective was put together. The words "time is a flat circle" are usually remembered as Rust's, but the phrase is actually first spoken in the season, not by Rust at all. It is first said by a different character, a dangerous criminal the detectives are hunting. Rust simply repeats the idea later. That little twist, where the gloomy philosophy of the hero turns out to echo the words of a monster, is the kind of quiet, clever touch that one careful writer working alone can plant and pay off. It blurs the line between the haunted detective and the evil men he chases, and it rewards anyone paying close enough attention to notice. The timing of who played Rust mattered as much as the casting of Walt. For most of his career, Matthew McConaughey had been known for light, charming, romantic movies. Right before this show, he had started taking heavier, sadder, darker roles, and people had begun praising him as a serious actor in a way they never quite had before. Stepping into Rust, a gloomy man who speaks in long, slow speeches about the emptiness of life, fit perfectly into that new, more serious chapter he was building for himself. The role and the moment lined up exactly right. So both shows are deep studies of a damaged man, and yet the damage runs in opposite directions. Walt's damage grows. He starts mostly whole, just bitter and disappointed, and then the choices he makes slowly twist him into something worse and worse. His brokenness is a thing that happens to him across the story, piece by piece, lie by lie. You watch it spread like a crack creeping across glass. By the end, he is shattered, but you saw every step of the shattering. That is the horror and the pull of his story. You cannot look away because you are watching a person destroy themselves in slow motion. Rust's damage is already finished. It happened before the story even started, out in his painful past, and by the time we meet him, the breaking is long done. His brokenness is not a thing that happens during the show. It is the ground the whole show stands on. You do not watch him break. You watch him live inside a brokenness that was complete before the first scene. That is the weight and the sadness of his story. You are not watching a fall. You are watching a man who already fell long ago, walking around inside the wreckage, trying to make sense of it. This explains why the two shows feel so different, even though both are dark. Breaking Bad has the awful thrill of a slow-motion car crash, the sick excitement of watching someone choose, again and again, to become worse. There is forward momentum in it, a constant question of how far he will go. True Detective has the heavy, still sorrow of a man sitting in the dark, turning a hopeless idea over and over in his hands. There is no thrill of transformation, because the transformation already happened off-screen, years ago. Instead, there is the slow, mournful pull of trying to understand a man who has given up on the world, but cannot quite give up on the case. The two methods even shape how you feel about each man. With Walt, your feelings change as he changes. Early on, you pity him and root for him. By the end, you are horrified by him. Your view shifts because he shifts. With Rust, your feelings deepen rather than change. You do not start out liking him and end up hating him, or the reverse. You simply understand him more and more as the hours pass, peeling back layers of the same fixed man until you finally grasp the full shape of his sorrow. One character changes and drags your feelings along with him. The other stays still and lets you slowly come to know him. It all loops back to how each show was born. Breaking Bad came from a man steeped in years of television, who wanted above all to build a character who changes, and so he made Walt a creature of constant motion. True Detective came from a novelist making his first trip to the screen, who thought in terms of ideas and mood and a single steady voice, and so he made Rust a creature of stillness, a fixed point, delivering the book's philosophy out loud. The kind of person each creator was shaped, the kind of man each main character became. And here is the thing that makes both characters more than just clever designs. Walt's change feels true. Rust's stillness feels true. Neither man feels like a puzzle piece snapped into place to make a show work. They feel like real, whole people, which is the hardest thing of all to pull off. A character built to change could easily feel fake, like he is only transforming because the writers need him to. A character built to stand still could easily feel boring, like he is only repeating himself because the writers ran out of ideas. Both shows dodge those traps. Walt's slide feels earned, every step paid for. Rust's stillness feels lived in, the natural shape of a man who has truly given up. Two damaged men, one built to fall, the other built to hold. One a story of motion, the other a story of stillness. That single split, more than the deserts or the bayous or the gunfire, is the deepest difference between these two shows. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But a damaged man is never just damaged for no reason. There is always something underneath, some idea about the world that explains why he is the way he is. Walt has one. Rust has one. And the ideas humming beneath these two men come from very different places. One of them so tangled in older books and older thinkers that it once sparked a real argument about where a writer's ideas are truly allowed to come from. The next part digs into the beliefs buried under both men, and into the trouble those buried beliefs once caused. Section 5. The ideas buried under both men. Underneath every broken man, there is a belief about the world. Some idea that explains why he became what he is. Walt has one. Rust has one. Pull those buried ideas up into the light, and they look nothing alike. They come from different places. They point in different directions. And one of them got so tangled in older books and older thinkers that it once sparked a real public fight over where a writer's ideas are honestly allowed to come from. Start with the idea hiding under Breaking Bad, because it is folded right into the name of the show's greatest hour. The title of that famous episode, Ozymandias, comes from an old poem. The poem describes a traveler crossing a vast empty desert who stumbles on the ruins of a giant statue, half sunk in the sand, and broken to pieces. The statue once showed a mighty king, and on its base there are still proud, boastful words carved long ago. Words bragging about how powerful the ruler was, and how everyone should look upon his works and tremble. But all around those proud words there is nothing, just empty sand stretching out in every direction. The king is gone. His kingdom is gone. His power is gone. All that is left is a broken statue and an empty desert that does not care. That poem is the whole idea, sitting under Walt. Walt builds himself into a kind of king. He stacks up money and power and fear until he sees himself as a great man who has finally gotten the respect the world owed him. And then, exactly like the ruler in the poem, it all crumbles into rubble. By the time that famous episode airs, everything Walt built is collapsing around him, turning to dust in a single crushing hour, leaving him with nothing but the empty desert and the memory of what he thought he was. Naming the episode after that poem is the show quietly telling you the deepest truth about Walt. Pride does not last. Power does not last. Build whatever empire you want, and the sand will swallow it anyway. What makes the choice so sharp is that the poem is short, and the lesson is plain. The carved words on the statue brag about greatness, and the empty desert all around them answers that brag without saying anything at all. The land simply outlasts the man. That is the trap Walt walks straight into. He spends years convinced he is building something that will stand, something that will mean he mattered, something his family will remember him by. The show keeps showing him the desert. It keeps showing him the emptiness that waits for every king, no matter how clever. He never quite reads the warning, even though it surrounds him in every wide, dusty shot. By the time he understands, the statue is already rubble. There is a second idea folded under Breaking Bad too, and it lives in Walt's job. Walt is a chemistry teacher, a man who understands how things break down and change and transform. The show uses that constantly. It is a story obsessed with change and consequence, with the idea that every action sets off a chain of reactions you cannot fully control. Walt thinks he can mix the perfect formula for his life, the way he mixes chemicals in a lab, carefully and precisely, with a clean result at the end. The show keeps proving him wrong. Real life is messier than chemistry. The reactions spin out of his hands. People get hurt in ways he never planned. The buried idea under Walt is that you cannot control the chain of consequences once you start it, no matter how smart you are. There is a quiet irony in this that the show enjoys. Walt's whole pride rests on being the smartest man in the room, the one who understands the science nobody else does. He believes that understanding gives him control. But the science he loves is the very thing that tells the truth he refuses to hear. Because chemistry is the study of change, of one thing turning into another and never turning back. A reaction, once started, runs to its end. You cannot unmix what you have mixed. Walt knows this better than anyone, and yet he keeps acting as if his own life is the one reaction he can stop whenever he likes. The man who teaches how change works is destroyed by his own refusal to believe it applies to him. These ideas are fairly plain and clear. They come from a poem most students read in school, and from a job everyone understands. They do not require any special reading to grasp. The darkness under Breaking Bad is the everyday darkness of pride, greed, and choices that come back to bite you. Anyone can feel it, without studying a thing. The idea buried under Rust Cohol is a much heavier, much stranger thing, and it reaches back into far older and gloomier books. Rust believes, deep down, that human life is a kind of mistake. He thinks that being alive and aware and able to think might actually be a curse rather than a gift, because all that awareness mostly lets people understand how much they will suffer and how surely they will die. He believes the world is empty of any real meaning, that the comforting stories people tell themselves are just lies they use to get through the day. This is an extremely dark way to see things, far darker and more total than Walt's everyday pride and greed. Walt is corrupted by the world. Rust has given up on the world entirely. He says it plainly, early on. When his partner first tries to get to know him, Rust describes himself as a pessimist, a person who expects the worst of everything. And then he goes much further than that ordinary gloom. He suggests, in his slow, heavy way, that the kindest thing the human race could do would be to stop having children and quietly let itself fade out of existence, ending the long mistake of being aware at all. It is about as bleak a thought as a person can hold. Most gloomy people simply expect bad days. Rust expects nothing less than that life itself was an error that should never have happened, and that the brave, dignified response is to refuse to pass that error on. These bleak ideas did not come out of nowhere. The man who created True Detective, Nick Pizzolatto, drew Rust's gloomy speeches from a whole shelf of older writers and thinkers. A big chunk of Rust's dark philosophy was pulled from the work of a horror writer named Thomas Ligotti, who had written a gloomy book arguing that human awareness is a kind of terrible trap. Pizzolatto also reached back to old thinkers and to spooky old fiction writers, weaving threads from many different gloomy sources into the long speeches Rust delivers. The mysterious names that float through the season, the strange references to a yellow king and a lost place called Carcosa, were borrowed from an old, eerie book of weird tales written more than 100 years ago. Rust's most famous line, the one about time being a flat circle, traces back to an old idea from an old thinker about how everything repeats forever. So the darkness under Rust is borrowed darkness, gathered from a stack of older books and stitched into a TV detective's mouth. And that is exactly where the trouble started. In 2014, while the show was at the height of its fame, some people who knew Thomas Ligotti's gloomy writing very well started reading Rust's speeches very closely. Two of them, fans and defenders of Ligotti's work, came forward with a serious accusation. They claimed that Pizzolatto had not simply been inspired by Ligotti, the way writers are always inspired by other writers. They claimed he had lifted Ligotti's actual words and ideas too closely, copying rather than honoring. In their view, the line between paying respect to an older writer and taking too much from him had been crossed. This is a genuinely tricky question, and it does not have an easy answer. Every writer who ever lived learned from the writers who came before them. Ideas get passed down, reshaped, and reused all the time, and that passing down is a normal and healthy part of how stories get made. The hard part is knowing exactly where honoring an older writer ends and copying him begins. Borrow an idea and make it your own, and most people call that inspiration. Borrow the actual words too closely, and people start calling it theft. The accusation against Pizzolatto landed right on that blurry line, and people argued about which side of it he was on. In his own defense, there is one important point worth knowing. Pizzolatto never hid these influences. He spoke openly about the writers who shaped Rust. He named the gloomy thinkers and the old fiction writers as the sources he had drawn from. And he even said he would be glad if the show sent more readers their way. A person hiding theft does not usually point straight at the people he supposedly stole from. So while the accusation was real and the debate was real, the man at the center of it had been fairly open about where Rust's darkness came from all along. This whole tangle reveals something deep about the difference between the two shows. The darkness under Breaking Bad is homegrown and plain. It comes from a poem and a chemistry set, from pride and greed and consequences. Ideas so common that they could never spark a fight about where they came from. Nobody owns the idea that pride leads to a fall. The darkness under True Detective is bookish and borrowed. It comes from a careful pile of older, gloomier writers, woven together by a man who used to teach and write books for a living. That bookish, borrowed quality is exactly what made it possible to argue about, because borrowed ideas can always be traced back to whoever had them first. And this circles right back to who made each show. Vince Gilligan came up through years of television, a world of plain, strong, widely shared storytelling. The ideas under his show are plain and strong and widely shared to match. Nick Pizzolatto came from books and from teaching, a world steeped in older writers and deep reading. The ideas under his show are steeped in older writers and deep reading to match, right down to the trouble that came with leaning on them too hard. Each creator filled his show with the kind of darkness his own background had taught him to reach for. There is something worth admiring on both sides here, even with the controversy hanging over one of them. The plain darkness of Breaking Bad has enormous power, precisely because it is so easy to feel. You do not need to have read a single gloomy book to understand Walt. You just need to have wanted more than you had, or to have made a choice you could not take back. The show speaks in a language everyone already knows, the language of ordinary wanting and ordinary regret, and that is part of why it reached so many people so deeply. The bookish darkness of True Detective has its own power, a richer and stranger kind. For viewers who love digging beneath the surface, the show is a treasure chest. Every gloomy speech can be traced back to some older thinker. Every mysterious name can be chased into some older book. The season rewards people who want to read around it, who want to follow the threads out into the wider world of weird old fiction and gloomy old philosophy. That density gave the show a second life beyond the screen, as fans turned into detectives themselves, hunting down where every dark idea had come from. The controversy itself, in a strange way, proves how seriously people took the show. Nobody argues this hard about where the ideas came from in a series people do not care about. The fact that fans of an obscure horror writer sat down and combed through a detective show's speeches, line by line, comparing them to older books, shows just how dense and deliberate True Detective felt. It invited that kind of close reading. It practically begged for it. And then it had to live with the consequences of inviting it. Because once you point people toward your sources, they can check your work. So the buried ideas under these two men could hardly be more different. Walt sits on a foundation of plain, homegrown darkness, the everyday truth that pride and greed lead to ruin, an idea as old and as common as the poem his greatest episode is named after. Rust sits on a foundation of deep, borrowed darkness, a careful stack of older gloomy writers, woven into his every speech, rich enough to reward years of study, and dense enough to spark a real fight about ownership. One darkness anyone can feel, the other darkness rewards anyone willing to read. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. These deep ideas do not stay buried, though. They float up to the surface and turn into something you can actually hear, into lines of dialogue so sharp and so quotable that they break free of the shows entirely and take on lives of their own. Both series produced words that millions of people now repeat, without always remembering where they came from or what they truly meant. The next part follows those famous lines out into the world and looks at what happens to a piece of writing once it slips loose from the story that made it. Section 6. Lines that walked out of the shows. Some lines are too good to stay inside the story that made them. They slip loose. They get repeated at parties, printed on shirts, turned into jokes and pictures online, said by people who have never watched a single episode. Both Breaking Bad and True Detective produced lines like that. Words so sharp and so catchy that they broke free of the shows entirely and started living their own lives out in the world. And something strange happens to a line once it walks out the door. It often loses the very thing that made it powerful in the first place. Breaking Bad gave the world a small handful of these escaped lines, and they all cluster around the same thing: Walt's pride. The most famous of them comes from a scene fairly deep into the run. Walt's wife is frightened. She is worried that someone dangerous is going to come to their door and hurt her husband because of the ugly business he has gotten himself into. She wants him to be careful, to be scared, to understand the danger he is in. Walt's answer turns the whole picture inside out. He tells her she has it completely backwards. He is not the one who should be afraid. He says he is the danger. He says that when someone opens the door and finds death waiting on the other side, he is that death. He is the one who knocks. It is a chilling moment inside the show. The timid teacher from the early episodes is fully gone, and in his place stands a man so swallowed by pride and power that he now thinks of himself as the scariest thing in any room. The line works because of everything around it. You know this man. You watched him start out meek and apologetic. You watched the slow, awful change. So when he says he is the one who knocks, it lands like a punch, because you remember exactly how far he had to fall to be able to say it. Out in the world, though, the line got stripped down. It became a tough guy slogan, a thing people say to sound powerful, printed on posters, and repeated as a kind of boast. Detached from the show, it sounds cool and strong, like something a hero might say. But inside the show, it is not cool at all. It is the sound of a good man being eaten alive by his own ego, a warning sign of how lost he has become. The world kept the strength of the line and threw away the horror of it. People quote it to sound powerful, missing that the show meant it as a sign of a soul rotting from the inside. There is a quiet cruelty in that scene that the slogan version completely erases. Walt is not saying those words to an enemy or a rival. He is saying them to his frightened wife, a woman trying to protect him, a woman who still half believes he is a victim, caught up in something too big for him. He answers her fear and her care by bragging that he is the thing she should fear most. So the line is not just a boast. It is a husband revealing to his wife, almost proudly, that the gentle man she married is gone. Stripped down to a poster slogan, it becomes a fun flex. Left inside the scene, it is one of the coldest moments in the whole show. A marriage quietly dying in a single sentence. The same thing happened to another Breaking Bad line. The moment where Walt forces a rival to say his name. In the scene, it is a display of pure, bloated ego. A man demanding to be recognized and feared, drunk on his own importance. Out in the world, it became a catchphrase, a fun thing to repeat, a sound clip people share for a laugh. The menace got sanded off. What was meant as a portrait of dangerous pride turned into a playful quote, which is a strange fate for words that were written to show a man at his ugliest. True Detective gave the world its own escaped line, and it is the strangest one of all, because it was strange to begin with. Rust Cohle, the gloomy detective, says at one point that time is a flat circle. The idea behind those words is bleak and heavy. He means that everything that has ever happened will happen again and again, forever, with nothing ever truly changing. Every life and every death, repeating endlessly, with no escape and no point. It is one of the darkest things a person could believe. The idea that nothing you do matters because it will all just happen over and over. For all eternity, anyway. That line walked out of the show and became enormous. People repeat it constantly. It turned into one of the most quoted pieces of television from its whole era. A phrase that pops up everywhere, often said with a knowing little smile. And just like the Breaking Bad lines, it mostly lost its meaning along the way. Out in the world, time is a flat circle became a casual thing to say whenever life feels repetitive, whenever you are stuck doing the same boring task again, a light shrug of a phrase. The crushing hopelessness underneath it, the genuine despair of a man who believes existence is a pointless loop, got left behind. People say it to be funny. Rust said it because he had stopped believing life had any purpose at all. There is an extra wrinkle to this particular line that makes it even more interesting. Most people remember those words as belonging to Rust, the haunted hero of the show. But as touched on earlier, the phrase is actually first spoken in the season by someone else entirely. A dangerous criminal the detectives are chasing. Rust only repeats the idea later. So the line that escaped into the world and got attached so firmly to the gloomy detective did not even start in his mouth. That small fact tends to vanish completely once a line goes loose. The world remembers the cool detective saying it and forgets the disturbing context that the same dark thought first came from a monster. The forgetting can go even further than that, into the strange territory where people misremember the scene itself. Many viewers are sure they remember Rust crushing an empty beer can while he explains the flat circle idea, the gloomy detective slowly flattening the metal as he describes time flattening down into a loop. It is a vivid picture, and it feels exactly right for the moment. But that memory is false. The scene people are picturing does not happen the way they think. This is what fame does to a line. It does not just rub off the meaning. Over time, it can reshape the very memory of how the words were said, until a whole crowd of people confidently remembers a moment that never quite existed. The line escapes the show, and then it starts rewriting the show in everyone's heads. Put these escaped lines side by side, and a clear pattern shows up. In every case, the line was written to do one thing inside the show, and the world repurposed it to do something else, usually something lighter and emptier. Walt's lines were written to show a man drowning in pride and turning into a monster. The world repeated them as cool boasts, keeping the swagger and dropping the warning. Rust's line was written to express deep, genuine despair about a meaningless universe. The world repeated it as a casual shrug about boring routines, keeping the catchiness and dropping the hopelessness. In both shows, the writers buried real darkness inside memorable words, and in both cases, the world plucked out the memorable words and left the darkness behind on the cutting room floor. This is not really a failure of the audience. It is just what happens to language when it gets famous. A line that millions of people repeat cannot carry its full original weight with it everywhere it goes. There is no room. The deep context, the slow build-up, the careful meaning, all of that lives back inside the show, in the hours of story that surround the line. Pull the line out of those hours and it gets lighter, simpler, easier to toss around. That lightening is the price of becoming quotable. The words survive and spread, but the meaning mostly stays home. There is something a little sad in that, and something a little wonderful too. The sad part is obvious. Writers labor to pack meaning into a line, and then the world skims off the surface and ignores the depth. Walt's pride was meant to scare you. Rust's despair was meant to unsettle you. Watching those careful, dark intentions get flattened into fun slogans can feel like a loss, like a beautiful, troubling thing being turned into a toy. The wonderful part is real too. A line that escapes the show keeps the show alive. Every time someone repeats those words, even with the meaning rubbed off, they are carrying a little piece of the story out into the world, planting a seed. Some of the people who hear the catchy version will get curious. They will wonder where the words came from. They will track down the show, sit through the hours of story, and finally meet the full, dark meaning the words once carried. The flattened slogan becomes a doorway back to the real thing. So the lines that lose their meaning out in the world are often the very lines that send new people back to find that meaning in the first place. This difference between the shows says something deeper too. Breaking Bad's escaped lines are all about power and pride, big loud declarations of a man's swollen ego. They are extroverted lines, lines shouted at other people, lines about dominance and fear. That fits Walt, a man whose whole tragedy is about reaching for power and getting crushed by it. True Detective's escaped line is about emptiness and repetition, a quiet, inward thought about the nature of time and meaning. It is an introverted line, a line muttered almost to oneself, a line about the inside of a sad man's head. That fits Rust, a man whose whole story is about staring into the void and trying to make peace with what he sees there. So even in the lines that escaped, the two shows kept their separate flavors. Breaking Bad sent out boasts about power. True Detective sent out a sigh about meaninglessness. One show shouts, the other broods, and the lines that broke free from each one carry that exact difference with them, out into a world full of people repeating words they may not fully understand. It loops back, once again, to how each show was built. Breaking Bad's loud, proud lines came from a series obsessed with one man's rise and fall, a story all about ego and consequence. True Detective's quiet, gloomy line came from a series steeped in deep, bookish ideas about the emptiness of existence. The kind of line each show sent out into the world matched the kind of darkness each show was built to explore. Loud pride from the show, about a falling king. Quiet despair from the show, about a man who gave up on the world. There is one last thing these escaped lines reveal. They prove that both shows wrote dialogue good enough to outlive the screen. Plenty of television comes and goes and leaves no trace in the language at all. Nobody quotes it. Nobody prints it on anything. It simply fades. The fact that both Breaking Bad and True Detective dropped words into the common language that people still repeat years later is its own quiet proof of quality. You have to write something genuinely sharp for the world to bother carrying it around. Both shows cleared that bar. Both shows left fingerprints on the way people talk. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. These famous lines did not happen in empty space, though. They were spoken by specific men, in specific places, against very specific backdrops. And those backdrops, the dusty city of one show and the swampy country of the other, are not just pretty scenery sitting behind the action. In both series, the place itself does real work. It sets the mood, it shapes the men, it almost becomes a character in its own right. The next part steps back to look at those two worlds, the desert and the swamp, and at how deeply the ground beneath a story can shape the story standing on top of it. Section 7. The Desert and the Swamp. A story has to happen somewhere. Most of the time, that somewhere is just a backdrop, a painted wall behind the action that nobody really notices. But the best shows turn their setting into something more. They make the place do work. They let the ground beneath the story shape the story standing on top of it, until the location feels almost like a living thing, a silent character that never speaks, but changes everything around it. Breaking Bad did this with a dusty desert city. True Detective did it with a wet, green, sunken swamp. And the two places could hardly be more different, which is fitting, because they were shaping two very different men. Breaking Bad lives in Albuquerque, a city in the state of New Mexico, surrounded by wide-open desert. The desert is everywhere in this show. It is dry, dusty, and enormous, full of empty land stretching out to the horizon under a huge, pale sky. Walt and Jesse cook their first batches of the drug out in that desert, parked in a beat-up camper van with nothing around them for miles. The show returns to that emptiness over and over. sending its characters out into the sand to do their ugliest business, far from anyone who might see. The desert becomes the place where the worst things happen, a blank, baking nowhere that swallows secrets whole. This setting does real work for the story. The desert is a place of harsh truth. There is nowhere to hide out there. The land is stripped bare, exposed, honest. It matches a show about a man whose lies keep getting stripped away until the harsh truth of who he has become stands fully exposed. The emptiness of the desert also mirrors the emptiness Walt creates around himself. The more power he gathers, the more alone he gets, until by the end, he is as isolated as a man standing alone in the middle of all that sand. And of course, there is the poem his greatest episode is named after, the one about a ruined statue, half buried in an empty desert. The show's actual landscape and its deepest idea are the same landscape. Walt is a king whose works are crumbling into the sand, and the sand was right there on screen the whole time. The desert is also bright. This is important. Breaking Bad takes place under a glaring, sunlit sky, in a world of harsh light and sharp shadows. There is something almost cruel about all that brightness. It refuses to let anything stay hidden. It shines down on Walt's crimes without mercy, lighting up every ugly thing he does. A show about a man becoming a monster could have been set in shadows and darkness. Instead, it was set in punishing sunlight, which is somehow worse, because it means there is no comforting dark to crawl into. Walt does his terrible deeds in plain daylight, fully lit, fully exposed, with the harsh desert sun bearing witness to all of it. The city itself mattered to the show in a real, measurable way. Breaking Bad, filmed in the actual Albuquerque, using its real neighborhoods and streets and skies. The series put that city on the map for millions of viewers who had never thought about it before. Even with all the show's darkness, all its drugs and violence, it gave people a strong, vivid sense of the place. And afterward, the city saw a lasting boost in visitors, people who wanted to walk the same streets they had watched on screen. That is a sign of how powerfully the setting came through. A place does not pull in curious travelers unless the show made that place feel real and alive and worth seeing. True Detective lives in a completely different kind of world, down in the wet, swampy country of Louisiana. Where Breaking Bad is dry, True Detective is soaked. The land is low and flat and green, full of still water, tangled trees, and heavy damp air. There are swamps and bayous, marshy stretches where the water and the land blur together, where things sink and rot and disappear. There are crumbling old buildings, abandoned churches, forgotten roads, all of it slowly being eaten by the wet and the green. It is a haunted-feeling place, thick with the sense that terrible things have happened here, and that the land has quietly absorbed them. This setting does its own deep work, exactly the opposite work the desert does. Where the desert exposes, the swamp hides. The desert has nowhere to bury a secret. The swamp is nothing but places to bury secrets. The murky water, the thick trees, the rotting buildings, all of it is perfect for concealment, for things slipping out of sight and never being found. That matches a show about a hidden, tangled crime, a mystery where the truth keeps sinking out of reach, where evil hides behind respectable faces, and the answers stay buried for 17 years. The swamp is the perfect home for a story about things that stay hidden, because a swamp is a place built for hiding. The light is different too. Breaking Bad has the harsh, exposing brightness of the desert sun. True Detective has a heavier, hazier, more shadowed kind of light, the soft and gloomy glow of an overcast swamp. The whole show feels damp and dim, weighed down by humid air and gathering clouds. That dimness matches Rust's gloomy view of the world. The desert sun refuses to let anything hide. which suits Walt's story of exposure. The swamp's haze lets everything stay murky and uncertain, which suits Rust's story of a man peering into the fog, trying to make sense of a world he finds dark and meaningless. The light in each show is doing the mood work. Brightness for the show about a fall, haze for the show about a void. One person who watched the True Detective finale closely noticed something striking about how the show used its setting. They said that the director made the Louisiana landscape look dead and teeming with life at the same time. That is a beautiful way to capture what the swamp does in the show. It looks like a place of death and rot, full of decay and darkness and hidden horror. And yet it is also bursting with green, growing things, crawling with life in every still pool and tangled branch. That double feeling, death and life pressing together in the same frame, is exactly the strange, heavy mood the show was reaching for. The land itself carries the show's deepest tension, the eternal push and pull between darkness and light that the whole story circles around. Set the two worlds side by side, and the contrast is almost too perfect. The desert is dry, the swamp is wet. The desert is bright, the swamp is dim. The desert exposes, the swamp hides. The desert is empty, the swamp is crowded and tangled. They are opposite landscapes in nearly every way, and that is no accident, because they are serving opposite stories. Breaking Bad needed a place that strips everything bare, that lets no lie survive, that mirrors a man becoming horribly exposed. True Detective needed a place that hides everything, that lets the truth sink and rot, that mirrors a tangled mystery and a man lost in fog. Each show found the exact landscape its story required, and then leaned on that landscape until it became part of the storytelling itself. This is the mark of careful, thoughtful filmmaking. A lazy show treats its location like a parking lot, just somewhere to put the camera. A great show treats its location like an instrument, playing it to set the mood and deepen the meaning. Both of these shows played their settings like instruments. The desert is always whispering about exposure and ruin and isolation. The swamp is always whispering about hiding and rot and tangled darkness. The viewer may not consciously notice it, but the feeling sinks in anyway, scene after scene, until the place and the story have melted together into one thing. The settings even shape how the men move through them. Walt, in the desert, is often small against the vastness, a tiny figure dwarfed by endless sand and sky. That smallness quietly comments on his pride. He thinks he is a great king, but the desert keeps reminding the viewer how small he really is, how easily all that emptiness could swallow him. The land mocks his ego, just by being so much bigger than he is. No matter how powerful he feels, he is still just one little man in a huge, indifferent desert that will outlast him by 1,000,000 years. Rust in the swamp is often hemmed in, surrounded by close trees and thick growth and crumbling walls. That closeness mirrors his trapped, gloomy mind. He cannot see far in the swamp, just as he cannot see any meaning or hope in life. The tangled land presses in on him, the way his dark thoughts press in on him. Where the desert dwarfs Walt with openness, the swamp smothers Rust with closeness. One man is lost in too much space, the other is trapped in too little. It loops back, as everything in this comparison does, to the deepest natures of the two shows. Breaking Bad is a story of exposure, of a man's lies and crimes getting stripped away under a harsh light until the ugly truth stands naked, and so it lives in a bright, bare, exposing desert. True Detective is a story of hidden things, of buried evil and tangled mystery, and a man lost in gloom, and so it lives in a dim, tangled, hiding swamp. The landscape of each show is a perfect picture of the kind of story it is telling. Look at the ground, and you already know the tale. There is one more quiet thing these two settings share. despite all their differences. Both are real places, filmed in the actual world, rather than built on some fake set. Breaking Bad used the genuine Albuquerque. True Detective used the genuine Louisiana swamp country. That realness matters. It gives both shows a weight, a texture, a sense that these stories are happening in a world that truly exists, a world you could drive to and walk through yourself. Fake settings can feel hollow. Real ones feel lived in, full of the small accidents and details that no set builder can fake. Both shows reached for that realness, and both found it, in two places about as far apart in feeling as any two places in the country could be. So the desert and the swamp turn out to be far more than backdrops. They are storytellers in their own right, silent partners in the work, shaping the mood and the men and the meaning in every scene. The dry, bright, exposing desert built the world of a falling king. The wet, dim, hiding swamp built the world of a man lost in the fog. And in both cases, the ground beneath the story was busy telling its own version of that same story the entire time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every story that takes a man this far, through deserts or swamps, through pride or despair, eventually has to bring him somewhere. It has to end. And the endings these two shows chose are where their deepest beliefs finally come fully into the open. No longer hidden under poems or borrowed books or whispered by the landscape, but spoken plainly in the final moments. One show ends in a hard, honest confession. The other ends in a soft, surprising flicker of hope. The next part walks into those two endings, and into the very different final truths each show decided to leave its broken man with. Section 8. One ends in truth. One ends in light. Every long story eventually has to land somewhere. After all the build-up, all the darkness, all the slow turning of a broken man this way and that, the show has to make a final choice about what it all meant. The ending is where a series stops hinting and starts saying. It is the moment the show finally tells you, plainly, what it believes about its main character, and about the world he lived in. Breaking Bad made its choice. True Detective made its choice. And the two endings point in nearly opposite directions, which makes them the perfect final proof of how different these two shows always were underneath. Breaking Bad ends with a confession. For 5 seasons, Walt told himself a story about why he did everything he did. He always claimed it was for his family. He cooked the drug, built the empire, hurt the people, all of it, he insisted, to provide for his wife and children, to make sure they would be cared for after his cancer took him. That was his shield. That was how he lived with himself. Every terrible thing could be excused, in his own mind, because it was supposedly done out of love for the people he was leaving behind. He repeated this so many times that he seemed to half believe it himself. In the final episode, near the very end, that shield finally comes down. Walt sits with his wife for the last time, and he tells her the truth. He admits that he did not really do it for the family at all. He did it for himself. He says he liked it. He says he was good at it. He says it made him feel alive. After a lifetime of feeling small and overlooked, the power and the danger had made him feel real for the first time, and he chased that feeling for its own sake, not for anyone else. This is a stunning moment, and a brutally honest one. After years of lying to everyone, including himself, Walt finally faces the plain truth of who he is and what he wanted. He stops hiding behind the family. He owns it. He did it because he liked who it let him become. There is no comfort in this confession, no excuse left to hide behind. It is just the naked truth, spoken at last, by a man who finally stopped pretending. The whole long road of his transformation ends with him looking straight at himself, and admitting what he really was the entire time. This ending fits everything the show always believed. Breaking Bad was a story about a man stripped bare, about lies getting peeled away one by one until the harsh truth stood exposed under that desert sun. So of course it ends with the final lie peeled away, the deepest excuse abandoned, the harsh truth spoken out loud. Walt's whole journey was about a slow descent into honesty, about his own darkness, even as he descended into the darkness itself. The man who could not admit anything at the start admits everything at the end. The ending is the last and hardest truth in a show built entirely around the stripping away of comforting lies. There is no easy hope in it. Walt does not get redeemed or forgiven. He does not undo the damage. He simply tells the truth, and then his story closes. The show looks its monster in the eye, makes him confess, and lets that confession be the final word. It is a dark, honest, unflinching ending for a dark, honest, unflinching show. True Detective ends in the exact opposite place. It ends in light. For the entire season, Rust Cohle preached darkness. He believed the world was empty and cruel and meaningless. He believed human awareness was a curse. He believed nothing mattered, and nothing ever would. He delivered speech after speech about the pointlessness of it all. A man who had stared into the void for so long that he could see nothing else. If you had to guess how his story would end, everything about him pointed toward more darkness, toward a final confirmation that he was right, that the world really is as empty as he always said. The ending does the opposite. In the final scene, Rust and his partner Marty have survived their long, terrible case, and they are outside at night, looking up at the sky. Rust, badly hurt, talks about a strange experience he had while he was close to death, a feeling of warmth, of being surrounded by the love of people he had lost, his daughter and his father, a sense of peace he never expected. It shakes him. It cracks something open in a man who had sealed himself shut years ago. Then comes the turn. Rust looks up at the night sky, where the darkness is vast and the points of light are small and scattered. His partner notes that the dark seems to have far more territory up there, far more space than the light. And Rust, the lifelong preacher of hopelessness, disagrees with him. He says that once there was only dark, and that if you ask him, the light is winning. This is astonishing, coming from this man. The great believer in emptiness ends his story by choosing hope. The man who spent 8 hours arguing that nothing matters finishes by suggesting that maybe something does, that maybe the light is slowly gaining ground against the dark after all. It is a soft, surprising flicker of warmth at the end of a cold, heavy story, and it lands all the harder because nobody saw it coming. One person who watched it closely called the real twist of the whole finale, not the solving of the mystery, but the arrival of hope, the shock of this grim, brooding, hopeless show, ending on a note that was almost gentle, almost spiritual. This ending also fits its show, in its own strange way. True Detective always circled the push and pull between darkness and light. Its very landscape, that swamp that looked dead and alive at the same time, held both forces together in a single frame. So ending on the question of whether light or dark is winning, and answering, tentatively, that maybe it is the light, brings the whole season's deepest tension to a close. The show that lived in the gloom of the swamp lifts its eyes, at the very last moment, to the scattered stars. Set the two endings side by side, and the contrast is complete. Breaking Bad ends in hard truth. Its broken man faces himself, admits the worst, and offers no comfort. The final note is honesty without hope, a clear-eyed look at what a person really was, with no soft landing. True Detective ends in soft hope. Its broken man, against all expectation, turns toward the light and suggests the darkness might be losing. The final note is hope without certainty, a fragile, surprising warmth in a story that spent hours insisting warmth was a lie. These two choices say everything about the two shows. Breaking Bad was always about exposure, about the truth coming out no matter how ugly, and so it ends with the ugliest truth of all, spoken plainly. True Detective was always about the struggle between dark and light, about a man lost in gloom, and so it ends with that man finally choosing, just barely, to believe in the light. One show closes by facing the worst, the other closes by reaching for the best. There is a deep difference in feeling here too. The end of Breaking Bad leaves you sober and still. You have watched a man destroy himself and everyone around him, and at the end he tells the truth, and then he is gone. There is a grim satisfaction in it, the feeling of a story completed honestly. But there is no warmth, no relief. It is the quiet after a long, sad collapse. The end of True Detective leaves you unexpectedly lifted. You have sat in darkness for hours, braced for more darkness, and instead, the show hands you a small, surprising gift of hope. It is the feeling of dawn breaking after the longest possible night. Neither ending is better. They are simply true to their own shows. Breaking Bad could not honestly end in hope, because it was a story about a man choosing to become a monster, and hope would have cheapened that choice. The hard truth was the only honest ending. True Detective could not honestly end in pure darkness either, because, despite all of Rust's gloom, the show was always quietly asking whether the dark really does win, and to end with the dark winning would have closed off the very question it cared about most. The flicker of light was the only honest ending for a show that always wondered if the light might matter. It loops back, one final time, to the men at the center of each story. Walt changed across his whole show, fell across his whole show, and his ending is the bottom of that fall, the final honest word about how far he went. Rust stood still across his whole show, fixed in his gloom, and his ending is the one thing that finally moves in him, the single small shift from total darkness toward a sliver of hope. The man of motion ends at the end of his descent. The man of stillness ends with his one true moment of change. Each ending gives its man exactly the kind of finish his whole story was built to earn. There is one more thing worth noticing about these two endings, something that ties them together, even as they point apart. Both endings are about a man finally telling the truth. Walt tells the truth about why he did everything, that he did it for himself because it made him feel alive. Russ tells the truth about what he felt in the dark, that he sensed love and peace and the possibility that light is winning. Both men spend their whole stories hiding something. Walt his selfishness and Rust his buried hope. And both men, at the very end, finally say the thing they had been hiding. One truth is dark, and one truth is bright, but both are confessions. Both are a guard finally coming down. In their last moments, these two opposite men do the same human thing. They stop pretending. Two endings, then. One, a hard confession, spoken in the cold light of honesty. One, a soft hope, whispered up at a sky full of stars. The falling king admits what he was. The gloomy detective admits what he felt. And in those final moments, both shows hand their broken men the one thing each had been running from all along. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But endings are not only felt by the people inside the story. They are judged by the wide world outside it too, by critics and award givers, and millions of viewers, all forming their verdict on what they just watched. And in a strange twist of timing, these two shows ended up standing on the very same stage, on the very same night. Their finest work weighed against each other, in front of everyone. The next part steps out of the stories and into that night. when Breaking Bad and True Detective met face to face, and the world finally decided, out loud, how it felt about each one. Section 9. The night they stood on the same stage. Stories live inside their own worlds, but the people who make them have to step out into the real one eventually, into a world of judges and prizes and public verdicts. And in one of those odd accidents that history sometimes hands us, Breaking Bad and True Detective ended up walking out onto the very same stage on the very same night, their best work set side by side and weighed against each other in front of everyone watching. It was the kind of head-to-head meeting that almost never happens this cleanly. Two shows people had been arguing about for months, finally measured against one another, in public, with trophies on the line. The night was a big television awards ceremony in 2014, the kind of evening where the whole industry gathers to hand out prizes for the best work of the year. By the time it rolled around, both shows had finished their runs, and both had spent months being praised, debated, and compared. Breaking Bad had ended the previous fall, going out on its incredible final stretch of episodes. True Detective had aired its whole first season earlier that same year, exploding into the conversation and dominating it for weeks. So when the nominations came out and both shows landed in the same major categories, people sat up. This was going to be a contest. The slow-burning, 6-year giant against the sudden 8-hour phenomenon. The team-built machine against the single-author vision. Everyone could feel the matchup coming. The biggest collision was in the category for the best lead actor in a drama, and it was a genuine showdown. On one side stood Bryan Cranston for playing Walter White. By this point, Cranston had already won that same award several times across the show's run. 3 times before, in fact. He was the man who had carried Walt all the way from gentle teacher to terrifying monster, and his work in the final season had been some of the most praised acting anywhere. He was a known champion, a repeat winner, the established king of the category. On the other side stood Matthew McConaughey for playing Rust Cohle. McConaughey was riding an enormous wave. He had just come off a major run of serious, acclaimed roles, the new chapter of his career, where the world had stopped seeing him as a light romantic comedy star and started seeing him as a heavyweight. He had recently won the biggest film acting prize there is for a movie role, and his gloomy, hypnotic detective in True Detective had been one of the most talked about performances of the entire year. He arrived as the hot new force, the movie star crashing into television and seeming to conquer it instantly. So the contest had a real shape to it. The veteran television champion against the surging movie star. The man who had spent years building one unforgettable character against the man who had detonated one unforgettable character in a single season. Many people genuinely could not call it. Plenty of them bet on McConaughey, swept up in the wave he was riding, certain the newcomer would knock the old champion off his throne. When the envelope opened, the winner was Bryan Cranston. The veteran held his ground. Cranston took the prize for the 4th time, beating the surging movie star, sending Walter White out as a champion one last time. It was, in its way, an upset, because so many had expected McConaughey to take it. One writer captured the strangeness of it perfectly, joking that the night's biggest surprise was a 5-time winner beating a movie star. The familiar face, the long-running show, the team-built giant, all of it won out over the dazzling newcomer. Years of patient work had piled up into a weight that the sudden phenomenon, for all its heat, could not quite overcome. That single result tells you something important about how these two shows were seen. Breaking Bad had earned a kind of deep respect, the respect that only comes from doing great work for a long time and sticking the landing. People had lived with Walt for 6 years. They had watched the slow, careful build, the patient transformation, the perfect ending. That accumulated weight counted for a lot. True Detective had earned a different thing, a burst of dazzled excitement, the thrill of something brilliant arriving all at once. But excitement and respect are not the same. And on that night, the deep respect of the long road edged out the bright thrill of the short one. The lead actor prize was only the beginning of the night for Breaking Bad, though. The show went on a tear. It won the award for the Best Drama Series of the year, the top prize of the whole evening, claiming its place as the finest show on television one last time. Its supporting actors won too. The man who played Walt's young partner Jesse, Aaron Paul, took the prize for Best Supporting Actor in a Drama, repeating a win he had earned before. The woman who played Walt's wife Skylar, Anna Gunn, took the prize for Best Supporting Actress in a Drama, also repeating an earlier win. And the writer of that famous Greatest Episode, Moira Walley-Beckett, won the prize for the Best Drama Writing of the Year for her work on it. It was close to a clean sweep. In nearly every major drama category it entered that night, Breaking Bad walked away with the trophy. The show that had spent years slowly building its reputation finally collected the full reward for all that patient work, all at once, in a single triumphant evening. It went out not with a whimper, but with arms full of prizes. The team built giant, proving that 6 years of careful, shared effort could conquer everything in its path. True Detective, for all its heat and all its hype, mostly went home empty-handed that night. The movie star lost the acting prize. The show lost the top drama prize. Category after category, the sudden phenomenon watched the long-running giant take the trophy instead. But there was one place True Detective broke through. One category where the newcomer beat the giant. And it is the most fitting possible category, because it points straight back to the deepest difference between these two shows. True Detective won the prize for the Best Drama Directing of the Year, and the man who won it was Cary Joji Fukunaga, the single director who had shaped all 8 episodes of the season by himself. He won it specifically for the episode containing that famous 6-minute unbroken take, the one where the camera follows Rust through a robbery gone wrong without ever cutting away. The lone director, with his lone impossible shot, claimed the one trophy that the entire team behind Breaking Bad did not. Think about how perfect that is. Of all the awards handed out that night, the single one True Detective took was the one for directing. And directing was the heart of what made True Detective special, because it was a show defined by one director's controlling vision, one set of hands gripping the wheel for all 8 hours. Breaking Bad swept the categories that reward team effort and long build-up, the writing, the acting, the show as a whole, because Breaking Bad was a triumph of team effort and long build-up. True Detective won the single category that rewards one person's bold visual swing, because True Detective was a triumph of one person's bold visual swing. The awards split exactly along the line that always divided the two shows. The team won the team prizes. The lone visionary won the lone visionary prize. This is almost too neat to be real, and yet it happened exactly that way. The whole long comparison between these two shows, the team versus the single author, the long road versus the short tunnel, the many hands versus the 2 minds, all of it played out in miniature on that one awards stage. Breaking Bad, built by many, won the awards that honor many working together. True Detective, built by essentially 2 people leaning hard in one direction, won the award that honors a single director reaching for something huge. The prizes told the same story the shows had been telling all along. It is worth sitting with what each side of that split really means. Breaking Bad's sweep was a victory for patience and teamwork. The show proved that if you gather the right people, share the load wisely, and build carefully over a long stretch of time, you can create something that earns the deepest and broadest respect there is. The writing won because a room full of writers had labored over every line for years. The acting won because actors had lived inside their characters long enough to know them completely. The top prize won because all of those pieces, built by all of those hands, had fused into something whole and great. It was the reward for the long road, for the highway built mile by many workers, finally reaching its destination in triumph. True Detective's single directing win was a victory for bold individual vision. The show proved that one person, gripping the wheel with total focus, swinging for something most people would call too risky, can produce a moment so striking that it beats even a beloved giant in the one category that matters most to it. The directing won because one man had dared to attempt a 6-minute unbroken shot and pulled it off through sheer nerve and obsession. It was the reward for the short tunnel, for the narrow passage carved by focused hands, for one person refusing to blink. Smaller than Breaking Bad's haul, yes, but precise and meaningful, landing on exactly the thing the show did best. The contest also revealed something about how the world weighs these two kinds of achievement against each other. When forced to choose, the judges leaned toward the long road over the short burst, toward accumulated greatness over sudden brilliance. Breaking Bad got the bulk of the prizes because there is something about a long, sustained achievement that earns a deeper trust. A show that stays great for 6 years has proven itself over and over, season after season, removing all doubt. A show that arrives brilliant in a single season is dazzling, but it has not yet had the chance to prove it can do it again. The judges, that night, rewarded the proven over the promising, the marathon over the sprint. And yet, True Detective's single win carries its own quiet defiance of that logic. Because in the one category where individual vision matters most, the sprint beat the marathon. The newcomer, the short burst, the 8-hour phenomenon, took the directing prize right out of the hands of the 6-year champion. It is a reminder that bigger is not always better. That a single perfect swing can sometimes outshine years of steady work, at least in the one narrow place where that swing is the whole point. The giant won the war that night, but the newcomer won one sharp, telling battle, and it won it on exactly the ground where it was strongest. There is a human element to all of this too, beyond the trophies and the categories. For Bryan Cranston, that 4th win was a farewell. It was the last time he would be honored for playing Walt, the closing of a chapter he had poured years of his life into. There is something moving about a veteran taking one final prize for the role that defined him, going out on top, beating a surging newcomer to do it. It was the industry saying goodbye to Walter White, and to the actor who had made him unforgettable, with the highest honor it could give. For Matthew McConaughey, the loss stung, but barely mattered to the larger story of his career. He was on a rocket. He had already won the biggest film prize there is. He had remade his entire reputation. Losing one television award to a beloved veteran did nothing to slow the wave he was riding. His detective had been seen, praised, and absorbed into the culture, and no missing trophy could undo that. The performance lived on regardless, quoted and admired, and studied, which is its own kind of winning, the kind that does not require an envelope. For Cary Joji Fukunaga, the directing win was a launching pad. It marked him as a major talent, the man who had pulled off the impossible shot, and it pointed his career toward bigger things ahead. His single prize, smaller than Breaking Bad's pile, may have meant more to his individual path than any single one of Breaking Bad's trophies meant to its already celebrated team. The lone visionary got recognized as exactly that, a lone visionary. And that recognition opened doors. And for Moira Walley-Beckett, the writer who won for Breaking Bad's greatest episode, the night carried a special weight. As noted earlier, her win made her the first woman in 20 years to take that particular drama writing prize on her own. So tucked inside Breaking Bad's sweep was a moment of real significance for women writing television. A barrier quietly broken, a rare and meaningful first. The team's triumph contained, within it, one individual's history-making achievement. Step back from the single night, and the whole picture clarifies. This awards ceremony was a snapshot, frozen in time, of how the world saw these two shows at the peak of their fame. Breaking Bad was seen as the proven master, the long-running giant deserving of every honor, the team-built achievement that had earned the deepest respect through years of consistent greatness. True Detective was seen as the brilliant newcomer, the sudden phenomenon, the single-vision swing that dazzled everyone and broke through in the one place its boldness mattered most. The trophies sorted the two shows exactly the way the rest of this comparison has, along the line between the team and the individual, the long road and the short tunnel, the accumulated and the sudden. It even circles all the way back to the very beginning of this whole story. Breaking Bad was born from a man steeped in years of team television, and on that awards night, the team won the team prizes. True Detective was born from a novelist and a single director working in tight lockstep, and on that same night, the single director won the single director prize. The way each show began predicted not only how it would peak, not only how it would end, but even how the world would finally judge it, out loud, on a public stage, with everyone watching. The beginning wrote the ending, all the way down to the trophies. There is one last thing this night proves, something larger than which show won what. It proves that both shows were operating at the absolute top of television. You do not end up sweeping the major categories, or beating a beloved giant in the one category you are strongest in, unless your work is genuinely extraordinary. The fact that these two shows were even in the same conversation, even on the same stage, even worth comparing trophy for trophy, is itself a sign that both had reached a rare height. Most television never gets near a night like that. Both of these shows stood at the center of it, dividing the honors between them, two different kinds of greatness, sharing one stage. The giant took most of the gold. The newcomer took the one piece that suited it best, and the world, watching, understood that it had just seen two of the finest things television could produce, measured against each other, and both found magnificent. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The trophies have been handed out. The verdict has been spoken. But a single awards night, however dramatic, is only one moment, frozen in 1 year. The real test of a show is not what it wins on one evening, but what it leaves behind over the long stretch of years that follow. How it lives in memory, how it shapes the shows that come after it, how it holds up when the hype has faded and only the work remains. The next part steps past that single night and into the long afterlife of both shows, into the lasting marks each one left on television and on the people who keep returning to them, year after year, long after the prizes were put away. Section 10. What they left behind. A single great night fades. Trophies get put on shelves and gather dust. The real test of any show is not the prize it wins on one evening, but the mark it leaves over the long stretch of years that follow, the way it lives in memory, the way it shapes the shows that come after it, the way it holds up once the noise dies down and only the work remains. By that test, the deeper test, both Breaking Bad and True Detective left behind something lasting. The marks they left look as different as everything else about them, which by now should come as no surprise at all. Start with what Breaking Bad left behind, because the scale of it is hard to overstate. Breaking Bad did not just become a beloved show. It became a kind of measuring stick, the thing other shows get compared to when people want to talk about greatness. Over its run, it collected an enormous pile of honors, dozens of award nominations, and a tall stack of wins. But the numbers only hint at the real legacy. The deeper truth is that Breaking Bad earned a reputation as one of the finest television series ever made. Full stop. A show that gets named again and again whenever people argue about the best the medium has ever produced. There is even a record attached to it. At one point, based on a careful tallying of critic reviews, Breaking Bad was recognized as the most critically praised television show of all time. Think about what that means. Out of every series ever broadcast, across all the decades of television, this one was, by that measure, the most consistently and universally praised. That is not a small thing to carry. It is the kind of distinction that turns a show from a favorite into a landmark, a permanent fixed point on the map of what television can be. Its greatest episode left its own lasting mark. That famous hour, the one named after the poem about the ruined king, became a benchmark of its own. On the big ratings site where regular viewers grade what they watch, it holds a perfect top score, a near impossible feat that almost no episode of anything ever reaches. Years after it aired, a major magazine ranking the greatest television episodes of all time placed it at the very top of the list, the single best episode ever made, in their judgment. So Breaking Bad left behind not just a great show, but a single hour that people point to as the high watermark of the entire medium, the best television has ever managed in one sitting. The show also left behind a thriving afterlife, more stories set in the same world. The people who made it were not finished when the final episode aired. They went on to make a whole prequel series, telling the earlier story of one of Breaking Bad's most beloved side characters, the slippery lawyer, and that follow-up show ran for years and earned its own mountain of praise. They also made a follow-up film that picked up right where the original story left off, chasing down the fate of Walt's young partner, Jesse. So Breaking Bad did not just end and vanish. It grew into a whole connected family of stories, an entire world that fans could keep returning to, long after Walt himself was gone. That is a rare kind of legacy. The kind where the original work is so rich and so beloved that it spawns more works, and those works are good enough to stand proudly beside it, and the show left behind that real city. As covered earlier, Breaking Bad put Albuquerque on the map for millions of people, and the boost in visitors lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. People still travel there to walk the streets they watched on screen, to see the real places where the story unfolded. The show left a permanent fingerprint on an actual place in the actual world, turning ordinary neighborhoods into landmarks just by filming there. Few shows leave a mark you can physically visit. This one did. Now turn to what True Detective left behind. Because its legacy is real too, just shaped completely differently. True Detective did not leave behind a 6-year giant, or a record for most praised show ever. It could not, because it was never built to be that kind of thing. What it left behind was a jolt, a sudden shock to the system of television that changed what people thought a TV show could be. When its first season arrived, it landed like a thunderclap. People had never quite seen anything like it on television, a series that felt this much like a long, serious film, this dense with ideas, this controlled by a single vision. Its arrival was an event, and the show drew enormous attention right out of the gate, with one of the strongest debuts its network had ever seen. That jolt changed things. True Detective helped push television toward a new shape. The idea that a show could be a short, complete, single-author, single-director story, rather than a long-running team machine. It proved that big movie stars would happily come to television for the right project, and that a season of TV could be treated like a major film, with one director and one writer pouring a unified vision into a tight handful of episodes. After True Detective, more shows started reaching for that model, the prestigious, film-like, limited story told by a focused creative team. The show left behind not a giant body of work, but an influence, a nudge to the whole medium about what was possible. It also left behind the strange, rich afterlife of its ideas. Because True Detective was so dense with deep, bookish references, it sent waves of curious viewers out into the wider world of gloomy old books and gloomy old thinkers. People who had never heard of the obscure horror writer behind Rust's dark speeches went looking for his work. People chased down the old, eerie book that gave the show its mysterious names. The show became a doorway, leading viewers from their screens into a whole library of older, stranger writing. That is a peculiar and wonderful kind of legacy. A television show that made people read, that turned its audience into investigators, hunting down where its darkness came from. Even the controversy over those borrowed ideas, the argument about how much a writer can take from those who came before, became part of the conversation the show left behind. A lasting question hanging in the air. And True Detective left behind that one perfect, impossible shot. The 6-minute unbroken take is still studied, still talked about, still held up as one of the most impressive pieces of camera work television has ever produced. Years later, people who care about how shows are made still point to it as a high mark of daring and skill. It became a kind of legend, a thing filmmakers admire and aspire to. Proof of what one bold director can pull off when he refuses to play it safe. That single shot may be the most concentrated piece of legacy either show produced, one stretch of 6 minutes that earned a permanent place in the history of how television gets made. Set the two legacies side by side, and the pattern holds. The same pattern that has run through this entire comparison. Breaking Bad left behind size and accumulation. A long-beloved giant, a record for most praised, a greatest episode crown, a whole family of follow-up stories. A real city transformed. Its legacy is broad and deep and sprawling. The legacy of a long road that many hands built over many years. It left behind a lot, because it was a lot. A vast and patient achievement that kept giving and giving. True Detective left behind sharpness and influence. A sudden jolt to the medium. A new model for what a show could be. A doorway into a library of dark old books. One perfect, legendary shot. Its legacy is narrow and intense and concentrated. The legacy of a short tunnel carved by focused hands. It left behind less in sheer quantity, but what it left was sharp and pointed, and genuinely changed things, the way a single bold idea can ripple outward long after the thing that carried it has ended. This difference in legacy traces straight back, one final time, to how each show was born and built. Breaking Bad came from the team world of television, ran long, was built by many, and so it left behind the broad, accumulated legacy of a team triumph. Lots of it, spread wide. True Detective came from a novelist and a single director, ran short, was built by essentially two minds, and so it left behind the sharp, influential legacy of a single bold vision. Less of it, but pointed and lasting. The beginning of each show predicted not just its peak, not just its ending, not just its awards, but even the exact shape of the mark it would leave on the world. Everything flowed from that first split in how they came to be. There is a question worth asking about both legacies. The question of how each show holds up once the hype fades and only the work remains. Breaking Bad holds up because it was built to. Its greatness was never about being new or shocking or of the moment. It was about deep, careful, patient craft, about a character study so thorough and a transformation so believable that it works just as well today as it did when it aired. A show built on hype fades when the hype fades. A show built on craft endures, because craft does not go stale. Walt's slow fall is just as gripping now as it ever was, because it was true to human nature in a way that does not depend on the moment. That is why Breaking Bad keeps getting named among the best. It was made of the kind of stuff that lasts. True Detective holds up too, though it carries one extra burden that Breaking Bad does not. Because so much of its initial power came from how new and surprising it felt, some of that first shock naturally fades with time and repeat viewing. The mystery, once solved, cannot surprise you again the same way. But underneath the surprise there is real, lasting craft. The controlled vision, the haunting mood, the hypnotic performance at its center, the genuine weight of its ideas. Those things endure even after the newness wears off. And the show gains something on rewatching too, because once you know where it is going, you can see how carefully it was all laid out, how every piece was placed by one careful mind. The first watch is about shock. Every watch after is about appreciation, noticing the craft you missed while you were busy being surprised. Both shows then pass the deeper test. Both hold up. Both reward returning to them years later. That is why people still play them late at night, still argue about them, still hand them to friends who have never seen them. They were not flashes in the pan, here for a season and then forgotten. They were built to last, in their two different ways, and last they have. There is something quietly beautiful in how the two legacies complete each other rather than compete. Breaking Bad showed the world the heights that patient, team-built, long-form television could reach, the rewards of the long road. True Detective showed the world the heights that bold, single-vision, short-form television could reach, the rewards of the short tunnel. Together, the two shows mapped out two completely different routes to greatness, and proved that both routes lead somewhere extraordinary. A young creator looking at these two shows learns a freeing lesson. There is no single correct way to make something great. You can build a giant slowly with many hands, or you can carve something sharp and focused with very few. Both paths are open. Both can lead to the top. It even reframes the whole idea of comparing them in the first place. The instinct, when two great things sit side by side, is to crown a winner, to decide which one is truly best. But these two shows resist that, because they are not really running the same race. Breaking Bad wins at being Breaking Bad, the long, accumulated, team-built masterpiece. True Detective wins at being True Detective, the short, intense, single-vision masterpiece. Asking which is better is a little like asking whether a long novel is better than a perfect short story. They are doing different things, reaching for different rewards, leaving behind different kinds of marks. The honest answer is that the world is richer for having both, and that the comparison teaches more than any crowning ever could. What they left behind, in the end, is two complete proofs of two different ideas. Breaking Bad is the proof that patience and teamwork, given enough years and enough care, can build something that towers over the medium and earns the deepest respect there is. True Detective is the proof that a single bold vision, gripped tightly and swung hard, can jolt the whole medium forward and leave a mark sharp enough to last. One is a monument built stone by stone. The other is a single brilliant strike. Both still stand. Both still matter. Both still pull people back, year after year, to watch a broken man walk through a desert or a swamp toward an ending that has not changed, but somehow always feels worth seeing again. The deserts, the swamps, the falling king, the gloomy detective, the team and the lone visionary, the long road and the short tunnel, the hard truth and the soft light, the swept awards and the single bold trophy, the sprawling legacy and the sharp one. All of it has been laid out now, piece by piece, side by side. The two shows have been turned over and examined from every angle. What remains is to gather all of it together, to step back from the individual pieces and see the whole shape at last, to ask what the long comparison of these two broken men and the two broken worlds they walk through finally adds up to. The closing part draws every thread into one place and asks the last and largest question of all, the question of what these two very different masterpieces, held up against each other, truly reveal. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.